So, I mean, just getting back to that sort of dichotomy that you made between like, they can't come up with a national issue in midterms that is moving the type of voters they need to move. And that
Mhm.
is, that's an issue in House races. Because by all accounts, I mean, it's one thing to say you got Herschel Walker at the top of the ticket, but it's clear that there's a certain group of people who are happy to split tickets when necessary.
Yeah.
We should have seen more pickups by the Republicans in the House. And in
Yeah.
fact, the places where they did pick up was in, places like in New York where I think it feels like they couldn't find enough of a distinction between the two candidates.
Mhm.
And you get just the sort of secular, more enthusiasm from the party that is out of power.
Yeah.
But you're saying in the presidential elections, because of the nature of the Electoral College, you got a place like Michigan or Pennsylvania or maybe,
Right.
I don't know, Wisconsin, or maybe Nevada, where there's a certain cohort of white working class type of people that are, have an outsized influence on the outcome of the election, and that changes things a little bit.
Yeah, I think it does. Perfect example is a state like California, right? In presidential election, California is off the table. It's a winner take all race. There's no real competitive thing when it comes to those kinds of state-right contests. But you do have House districts within the state of California where, you have Republicans and Democrats actually competing. And so what it takes to win a midterm race is to go to a state like California, find those districts, and then sort of appeal to these kind of middle of the road voters that don't really matter in the aggregate with as far as the Electoral College is concerned. States that do matter with the Electoral College are states where you have this kind of overall even partisan split, or like roughly even partisan split, where it could go one way or the other. Those end up being the swing states. And for the last, I guess, decade or now, that's increasingly been these Rust Belt states where, they might have been in the tank for Democrats 20, 30 years ago on the basis of a really strong labor movement and labor organizing, and these industrial sectors that had a lot of labor activity in them. All of that's kind of collapsed over decades and decades and decades. And so now you have these white working class voters who are more open to Republican politics, who are being pulled to the right for all sorts of reasons. And so there, Democrats have not solved their basic problems. I mean, they won in 2020. I think Biden won some of those voters back, did better than Hillary Clinton did. But there is still this vulnerability that I think comes from the absence of an economic agenda strong enough, compelling enough to win more of those voters back durably. That speaks to kind of post-industrial decline and the struggles of those communities. I think that's still the task Democrats set out for themselves. So if they think that, because we did well in this midterm election, 2024 is going to be like a walk in the park, as Republicans have shot themselves in the foot in all these ways, I think that would be a real mistake, just because it's a different kind of election. Maybe you feel better about the House in 2024, right? And that next round of House elections. But as far as winning the White House again, it's a different strategy and a different set of challenges that the party's going to continue to face.
So there's a delusion sort of on both sides, isn't there? One is that the Republicans, that they can get past Trump, as opposed to like their problems are more intrinsic to the Republican Party, and there's a delusion on the Democratic side that this is going to take care of itself on some level. I mean, if the Democrats have any awareness of that dynamic you're talking about in 2024, and I presume that there must be some awareness. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
Like, how do you reconcile, like, why didn't Biden come out and say, executive order, these guys are going to get health, sick days? I mean, there's deeper problems with the railway workers. I think, in terms of like, they have just cut so many workers that sick days are just really sort of like just to keep these people from, so that they can show up at work, really. I mean, it's almost a favor to the railway companies. So there's deeper problems there, but why didn't they just come out and do that the day too? Like, how do they not realize, like, these are small group of people, but they represent the
Yeah, they
types
stand in for these constituencies. I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that question. There was a lot of goodwill, coming out of the midterms, kind of toward Biden. Even early in his presidency, he made certain statements that led people to say, "Oh, this is the first pro-labor Democrat we've had in such and such time." uh,
and his
but yeah,
labor picks have been
think
good. I mean, his labor picks have been
alright.
good.
Yeah, yeah. So it is disappointing. As a matter of strategy, it doesn't make any sense. Just leaving the substance aside. Obviously, these workers deserve everything they're asking for, but even leaving that aside, as a matter of strategy, as you're saying, this could have been a moment where they say, "Look, we're standing against the bosses. We're standing for these people who aren't getting what they're due. We support labor action, broadly speaking, and it can get you the goods." And they miss this opportunity just because I think that Biden still is who he is. Like, he's still somebody who sees this need to hug the median of the highway, and still has those kinds of instincts. And again, it's going to be a problem for Democrats moving forward. They can do well in these midterm elections where Republicans shoot themselves in the foot on cultural issues and they lose, suburbia, and they lose like kind of middle to upper middle class suburban voters. But I don't see this result as being indicative of Democrats having substantially improved their standing with the working class of this country at all, unfortunately.
It almost goes without saying, but I mean, what are your hopes in terms of like Hakeem Jeffries providing that in the House?
They're not very high. I mean, I think that what's going to happen with Jeffries is going to be instructive, because there's been a lot of writing over the last several years about the need for a generational transition within the Democratic Party. So like Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn and Senator Chuck Schumer, these are all old guys. And the problem we have in Democratic Party is that you have a bunch of old guys running things, and you need younger blood in there to really change the party's ideological direction. I think it's problematic for a lot of reasons that so many of the leaders in the party are old. But I don't fundamentally see the real issue with the party being that they've got all these old guys in leadership, because now you're going to have this generational transition. Jeffries is a younger guy. Is he further to the left substantially than Nancy Pelosi is? I don't think so. I haven't gotten a sense that that's the case. But yeah, you have a lot of younger Democratic moderates who've been frustrated that they can't rise up the next few rungs of the ladder, who are not going to get that chance, more and more so over the next few years, without that really shifting the party in any, real ideological direction. Importantly, after the 2018 midterms, you saw challenges to Pelosi's leadership, from people in the House. They didn't go anywhere. But it was important to me that like the people who actually challenged Pelosi then, I think it was like Kathleen Rice in New York, Tim Ryan, and so on.
Yep.
These were not left-wing progressive people. These were moderates. In fact, their argument was that Pelosi's, too far left, is out of touch with the electorate, and the Democratic Party needs to do X, Y, and Z to appeal more moderate. That was the content of that challenge. It wasn't that these people are younger and then they're going to change the party. It was these people are younger and they want to be in the big chair now. And so more and more of those people are going to get to the big chair. People like Jeffries. And I don't know that's going to change the party very much at all, unfortunately.
Do you think, I guess my theory is that there's two types of changes that you can see, in this instance. One is ideological, and I would agree with you that, Jeffries is not anywhere nearer to the left than Nancy Pelosi. And I don't know if this is necessarily true of Hakeem Jeffries, although my sense is that it is to a certain extent, that the younger generation of politicians, period, I think across the board, have a different understanding of the nature of politics at this time. So like that a certain percentage of the decision-making by the Democratic leadership has been just tactically and strategically, aside from their the ideological reasons why they may be doing it, maybe this is just on the margins, has been just wrong because they don't understand the sort of like political moment that we're living in, where they don't understand the dynamics of this polarization.
Yeah, I mean, can they be more would they be more rhetorically aggressive? This new people coming in, Jeffries. We'll have to kind of see. But yeah,
But
I
I'm
mean,
wondering, can you be more partisan and more rhetorically aggressive without opening up the door inadvertently, in some respects,
to more left wing,
to a left wing rhetoric and ideological growth?
I think that you can. I mean, we have all these people who are like very, rabidly, and I think appropriately anti-Trump, right? All of these people who are like, Trump is a traitor, he's committing treason. Why won't Democrats do X, Y, and Z? Impeachment was all about this. Like, why aren't Democrats really pushing Trump's crimes and all of these issues? You had a bunch of people in the dead center of American politics who were very exercised about Trump's wrongdoing, and the Republican Party's complicity in it, and rightfully so. But I don't know that that kind of New York Times Atlantic nexus of people became more willing to support single care healthcare or anything like that as a consequence of their orientation. So I think it is possible to say very loudly and clearly the Republican Party is a problem. That we need to be aggressive in combating them, without not necessarily. I don't know, but there is. I think it does present opportunities though, because once you sort of cast out conservative politics, Republican politics as legitimate, and you stop saying we need to appeal to these guys, we need to work hand in hand with these guys, whether you like it or not, and whether you're personally embodying this or not, that does make a more hospitable environment for other left-wing people to come in.
Yes.
Now that you're not obligated to be as civil or whatever to the right, people who would be disqualified on the basis of the fact that they're not nice enough to the Republican Party then have more legitimacy within public discourse. So, I don't know that personally being more aggressive changes you, but to your point, I think it probably does create space for other people who are more left-wing than you are to enter the conversation.
I feel like it loosens the ground a little bit. And
I think it probably does, yeah.
And you can no longer weaponize, like, they can't reach across the aisle, because that's not
the aisle's not there to reach across anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody's reaching across the aisle. So now we have to sort of play in this sandbox and make it. So what do you think, where does the Republican Party go at this point? Like, if immigration doesn't have the same resonance, it turns out that people are just not as exercised about transgenderism, and we'll still have some sort of, like, I think, dead enders like the Ben Shapiro's and the Crowders, who are still going to try and, like, squeeze as much as they can out of that for dollars. But what they no longer have, like, deficit concerns, right? Like, Paul Ryan is just sitting on some corporate boards, I imagine, somewhere, and occasionally popping up. Like, what's left for them?
I think it's the old stuff. I think it's important to remember that we have Republicans who do win. Well, not even. I'm talking about like the old, like, you're paying too much in taxes. We support small businesses and entrepreneurship. That kind of old republicanism, I think, still has appeal, unfortunately, in a lot of places. I live in Maryland, right? We've had Larry Hogan, who's not going to leave office. Is a Republican governor in a state that Biden won. It wasn't even close. This is Maryland. Massachusetts had Charlie Baker, right? There are a couple of races, I think, in Oregon too, where Republicans did surprisingly well. Oregon is not really a red state. There are Republicans who can win competitive elections against Democrats on the basis of a very kind of economically focused message that isn't, like, overtly racist and that isn't overtly conspiratorial. And in fact, I think that the fact, Trump's dominance of the party makes those kinds of figures stand out and seem appealing in the way that they otherwise wouldn't have. I think you have a lot of moderate voters who are like, hell, I really want to just vote for somebody who's going to keep my taxes low, but who isn't a conspiracy theorist or an election denier. It's just the Republicans aren't running those kinds of people anymore. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be the place for them to go if they were smart. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts had something like a 70-80% approval rating amongst Democrats in the state.
Massachusetts has always been weird like that. We had Bill Weld.
Right.
I mean, there's
Right.
always been a space for like liberal Republicans, as it were, sort of technocratic ones, I guess.
But I think that there is across the country, unfortunately, and I don't like that this is true. But if you could have somebody who is like a moderate Republican saying, I'm turning the page from Donald Trump, we're just going to talk about jobs and blah, blah, blah. The old AEI, Heritage Foundation bullshit. Unfortunately, that would seem like such a contrast with Trump that people would reward it. They would say, this is a responsible Republican. Somebody like Tim Scott could probably win a presidential election, right? But the Republicans are still enthralled to, I think, a class of activists and wingnuts and enthralled the conservative media in a way that really inhibits their capacity to compete. And I don't think DeSantis is the answer. People are framing up DeSantis as the guy who's the anti-Trump. This is like the responsible figure who's going to seem responsible to the electorate. I think he's probably a better candidate than Trump. But also, he spends the months before the election stumping for Kari Lake and Blake Masters. I think he was
his
very
whole
into
agenda
the critical race theory stuff and the anti-transgender stuff. He was one of the most conservative members of the House when he was in the House. This is not,
He's just Trump with like a slightly better impulse control, it feels like. And he's not that Charlie Baker to Trump type of guy.
No, he's not. He's not. I mean, I think he has an easier chance of winning a general than Trump does, just because he's not Trump and doesn't, he's not Trump. But he's not an old style return to normal kind of Republican in any way. In fact, to the extent that I can understand it, his real asset going to the primary in 2024 is that he was more of a wingnut on COVID than Trump was. That's what he's going to run on with the base, right? Like Trump had this period where he was for lockdowns for a little bit and wanted to take credit for the vaccines. DeSantis, I think, is going to go into the primary in 24 and say, "Look, I never cared about COVID at all. I was always thinking that this is bullshit. We shouldn't do anything, and that's why you should vote for me." Is that a message that's going to appeal to a general electorate, a general public that did care about COVID and then, thought that the restrictions were sensible? I don't know that it will. But yeah, I don't see DeSantis as this, and this is what the piece I wrote about in TNR. This was sort of the argument. I don't see DeSantis as this kind of like dramatically different figure substantively from Donald Trump and somebody who signals, a return to the old Republican Party. I think that he's in many ways an outgrowth and a continuation of trends that Trump furthered. He just doesn't seem as outwardly wild. He's a more disciplined and natural politician than I think Trump is, and that's why he seems outwardly different to some people.